Welcome to the Water Channel podcast, a series of conversations on water, food, and agriculture. We feature stories and insights that are defining our present and are shaping our future. I am Abraham Abhishek. Globally, nearly 7 million refugees live in refugee camps. Camps are temporary facilities for the transient population, and that's how they are built. From images of refugee camps that we see in the media or on brochures and websites of humanitarian agencies, we know that housing in these camps is made up of tents and prefabricated units, so not a house with a little garden or an apartment with a balcony. People usually collect the water they need from shared communal taps. There's usually no running water, taps, or showers in individual housing units, which most of us listening to this podcast are used to having at our homes. What about toilets? I don't remember ever seeing a picture or a video clip of a toilet in a refugee camp, or hearing a lot of discussion or any discussion about sanitation facilities in refugee camps. Is that just me, or is there something to this?
When you want to advocate for emergency, what is nicer than put a picture of a girl at a tap with fresh, clean water coming out? That's so appealing. You think, that is necessary. Let's give some money for drinking water. But how to put a picture of somebody's poo or open defecation, or I think there it already starts. That is an area, that people don't want to think about or talk about.
That was Tineke Hooijmans, Associate Professor of Sanitary Engineering at IHE Delft Institute for Water Education in Delft, Netherlands. Tineke has had a long, accomplished career. She's an authority on a wide range of topics in sanitation engineering. Over the years, she has taken special interest in sanitation engineering in emergency situations, such as refugee camps or relief camps for a population displaced by natural disasters such as hurricanes and such. This might sound like a niche area of interest, something very specific and not of general public interest. But that's not correct. Because in a relief camp kind of a situation where thousands of people are living in close quarters, vast amounts of urine and feces are being produced on a daily basis. So good sanitation engineering is crucial in ensuring that all that piss and poop is being collected and treated and disposed in a way that minimizes health risks to everyone at the camp, communities living outside the camp, and minimizes impact on the environment. Tineke, thanks for joining us. How different are refugee camp toilets than the kind you and I are used to?
You would like to compare it with the Netherlands, for instance?
I mean, anywhere. Like, for example, refugee camp in Lebanon compared to a residential area in Lebanon.
The reason why I'm a bit hesitant here when I'm thinking is because the provision of toilets are so diverse all over the world, even if it's a non-refugee situation. So in Europe and in industrialized countries, you see that people have a sewer system. So you have a toilet, you flush the toilet, and all your excreta and everything is being transported via water to a centralized treatment system. And there the water gets treated, all the excreta, etc., gets removed and converted into biomass, and then you have clean water. But in many countries of the world, you don't have this provision of sewer systems. First, because it is a major investment, so that extremely costly, and you really need to design your city already in advance and think about these kind of infrastructure developments. And secondly, you need to have sufficient water as a transport mechanism. So when you have a very dry country, you not have sufficient water available, or you have no tap water, people are not connected to tap water, it makes no sense to put sewer systems, because this transport, which is water, is not available. So that makes also the whole toilet structure very much different. So what people have when they have no access to sewer systems, what you do is that you can still have a toilet in the house, and then it's connected to a septic tank. So you have a septic tank under your house or next to your house. And you also have that in remote areas in more industrialized countries. For instance, when you think of Sweden, people live very, very remote and it makes no sense to provide sewer systems there, then people actually have a septic tank under their house and that needs to be emptied and then material needs to be treated. So that's what you also have in a lot of other countries that are not, when cities, citizens are not connected to a sewer system, you have these kind of septic tanks. What is the situation about these septic tanks, that when you empty them, you actually need to treat that material? And that is a bit of a challenge because, you know, the whole infrastructure needs to be, well, let's say you have many players in that field. So you have a truck, people have to pay for the operator to empty your septic tank. The truck needs to go to a place, you need a specific treatment plant for that. So that involves more players and it's more complicated than having, organization-wise, than having a sewer system. Now, when you have not, you know, that kind of service available, so what you see that people, for instance, create septic tanks or system which there is leakage from the liquid phase to the surroundings, so that you don't have to empty that, or you don't have to empty that frequently. And I know in some countries that people even demolish indeed the structure of the septic tank to be sure that the liquid gets into the soil and that you don't have to pay for evacuation of that material. But of course, there is the risk of groundwater pollution. You can also have very dry systems so that you even don't use any water. And then your excreta gets also to like a pit, and it's very dry. And then, you know, it can indeed accumulate for many and many years. And then actually you can dig a new pit and accumulate that material. So also in the development context, you have many different type of facilities. Now, in the context of emergencies, when people go to a camp, maybe let me give the example of Cox's Bazar, because I was there. In Cox's Bazar, there is a region in Bangladesh and is bordered to Myanmar. And it's in the southeast of Bangladesh. So when the people, the Rohingya refugees, got attacked by the military, they moved massively over the border, and it was already happening for some decades. But lately there was a massive influx of people, about 700,000, and they occupied a very small region in Bangladesh. So it was hilly. It was, you know, there were. It was like a forest area. People cut all the trees. They built some houses. They used the trees for also for cooking, but they also needed some toilet facilities. So the Bangladeshi government and also the international NGOs and UNICEF and UNHCR came there to support. And what was basically done is that there were made holes in the ground, but it was a bit like sandy soil. So concrete rings were used to support the structure, that it would not collapse. And they put like a superstructure on top of that. So it is a very simple toilet. So it can be made of wood or plastic. Sometimes they do a separation for male and female or for disabled people. And they put a slab on top of it where you can just stand and squat. And in that way, you know, use the toilet. People in Bangladesh, the Myanmar, people from Myanmar, the Rohingya, they use water for cleansing, for annual cleansing. So those systems filled up quite rapidly because people also doing some washing themselves, they used water. And then those systems were filling up very rapidly. And then you had to, because there were so many people, it was so crowded, you could not afford to go to another location and make another pit, make another latrine. But then the organizations had to think about what to do with the material that is in these pits. So everywhere you saw small treatment systems started to be designed and to be developed. So people, also with the help of the Rohingya people, they start to get organized, to start to empty those pits manually, transport the material to a specific treatment plant. So people are, in that sense, far more in contact with their excreta than you would be under normal conditions. It is, yeah.
How different is the process of assessing, planning, designing toilets in refugee camps compared to more permanent communities like a residential area somewhere in a city?
It is not as well, designed and thought about in advance, and you don't have the time to really think about a good long-term stable solution. So what you see is that the international organizations, they focus a lot in the first phase of an emergency on the health aspect. So prevent indeed that people come into contact with feces. And then later on, they start to think about, okay, maybe like in the case with the Rohingya refugees, we also have to start thinking about treatment. And that is a big issue, because in many countries, first, maybe treatment is not necessary, because imagine that you have a country in a different climatical region where it is more dry and where the pits don't fill up so rapidly, people don't use water, then even you can afford just leave the pit there. And once the camp gets closed, you can just cover the pit and that's it. Or you can indeed go to another site, maybe on location, add another pit and then cover it later. So the organizations are also a bit trying to avoid to implement indeed this kind of treatment technologies, because it's a lot of work, and people get into contact when you empty the system, they get into contact with the feces and the other material, potentially health hazard. So, but it also shows this example that every situation is different, every case is different, and you need to be, prepared. What to expect.
Okay, so planning sanitation for refugee camps is about being rapid and flexible. But are there also standard frameworks and standard solutions going around?
Yeah, that is a good question. So far, the emphasis has been a lot on drinking water provision. And also it is more attractive for donors, to provide drinking water, and it's more, interesting than when people talk about excreta and sanitation. So when you look, for instance, at the Sphere Handbook, and that is a bit like the Bible to use and see what kind of criteria you have to use for under the emergency setting. So it's very helpful too. There is not so much on excreta management. And what we did, so at IHE, we were indeed thinking about different technologies, but what we also are doing, we are now part of the Global Wash Cluster, and we're also part of the fecal sludge management technical working group. And there we try to develop this kind of standards that you could use and that you could guide people in the context of an emergency. So, okay, when you need to provide sanitation, what is it that you have to take care of? What are standards when you set up, for instance, treatment systems? What are the standards that you can use to be sure that the systems work well? And that this fecal sludge management group is also providing support to local fecal sludge management teams in an emergency context. So to country teams. So if they have certain requests or they would like to know if what they do is maybe a good approach, they can always reach out and we can set up a call and a meeting with those people and discuss indeed the technologies they provide, they think about, and we can, show our reflection there. It is always complicated because besides you have the refugees, you have the theory, you have the technologies, but you're also dealing with the politics, because you might have a government, so you always have to align with the local government. And you might have a government who is opposing certain solutions. For instance, imagine that you have a camp situation and you estimate that the latrines that you made will fill up within 2 years or within 1 year. And then you propose a certain treatment technology and a location for a treatment plant, etc. But maybe the government, and that's my experience, will tell you, no, we don't allow that. I don't believe that the pits will fill up, because our experience in this country is that the pits don't fill up. So I don't believe that, and I don't allow and don't allocate any location for a treatment facility. So even, with all your theory and good intentions, you deal also with this kind of factors, which makes it very, very complicated.
So on-site sanitation systems like pit latrines, which, as you explained, involves collecting and storing excreta at the point of discharge and then transporting it to the point of treatment, that's the kind usually in refugee camps or emergency situations in general, right? What we as members of more permanent communities are used to is different. We flush our excreta away into a sewerage system made of pipes and closed drainage, which ends up in a treatment system kind of automatically. We've had this system for a while now. How good is this system? Do we need to modify it? When is it due for an update?
When people are used also to flush toilets and use that as a facility, it is very difficult to use also another technique. In Europe, we start to rethink about this approach how to deal with feces and with excreta. The fact that you use clean water, drinking water, quality, to transport excreta and other material. So when you really think about it, it's really a bit, bizarre also. So there are ideas indeed to think about, okay, could we not design our cities differently, and have dual systems in which we separate the rainwater, do rainwater harvesting, maybe have, use less water and have treatment on site and anaerobic treatment. So there are these new developments, but it takes a lot of time because it makes life maybe also slightly more complicated, because it is so easy, when you are living in a house and you have this kind of facilities that you don't have to think about it. It makes life maybe more complicated. And I think that's also with the whole, change of people's minds. There are other things that we have to think about it when we think about, for instance, global warming and shortage of materials. We should not maybe buy so many stuff, So there are other things about which we really have to think, but it's so easy to don't think about it and don't bother, just do the things you always did. And I think that's also what is great, that people don't want to think about it, don't want to, I also remember then when we had a discussion in South Africa, and you see there that people are also discussing more different sanitation options and on-site sanitation facilities. And then people said, no, that is like racist approach, because here the white people, they have the better facilities, they have the flush toilets. And now you want us to use those, poor facilities? No, we also want to have flush toilets. It's just a no-go to discuss any alternative technologies than flush toilets. So it is so complicated. It is so people still see this approach of flushing, flush toilets as the thing you want to have in the end, because rich people also have it, and that is something that we also want to have. When students come to IHE, it's always, they also, a lot of people want to choose for drinking water provision and not so much for sanitation, because who want to work with shit? Who want to work in this area? So that's, yeah. I think this is a bit like a stigma that's around it. But now more and more people are, of course, really realizing how important it is. But I think the last 10 years, you really saw this increase in focus on non-sewage sanitation. Before there was a lot of attention to sewage sanitation. Now, also with, I think, support of the Bill Melinda Gates Foundation, because they put a lot of financial support. You had a toilet fair and all this kind of activities to push this and think about alternative strategies if you don't have a sewer system, but still have indeed the privacy and the dignity of a good toilet. So that is not automatically related to a sewer system, that you can still have proper sanitation without a centralized treatment system. And I think that also pushed a bit the humanitarian sector, like, okay, it's something that we really have to take care about. It's also, you had the Millennium Development Goals, in which the focus was just a lot on toilet provision as such. And if you had it, okay, tick the box, you're done. But then with the Sustainable Development Goals, it was no, okay, we're not there if we just provide a toilet. Because the material that comes out, you need to deal with it. And now it's more also about treatment and about environmental sustainability. And that also pushed, the humanitarian sector to start think more and more about, okay, it's the whole treatment, the whole sanitation value chain. It is not only containment, it's also transport. Is that via sewers or another way? It's about treatment and it's about reuse. And it's also something that comes now in the humanitarian sector. And you also see now, at the East conferences and discussions, that there is also more and more a discussion on the link between humanitarian aid and development and resilience. It's not in isolation anymore, but we just have to link everything up.
How locked in to these centralized water-intensive sewerage systems are we? What incentives do we have that we should see to try and modify these systems?
Yeah, it is very complicated because it is very political. I gave you the example of South Africa, but I also remembered when I was like 5 years ago, I was in India, and we were like designing a research project, and we were discussing whether or not to study centralized technologies or think more about on-site sanitation. And then there was this researcher from India, and she said, well, she didn't want to go into that direction. And I said, why not? And she said, well, that is something for the poor people. And they will get centralized at a certain time, that will happen eventually. But I'm not going to worry about that. This research has to deal with the centralized sewage treatment systems. So there, shows it is also very political, because when these, non-centralized systems are considered as something, associated with the poor people, and they are not the people who are empowered or can say something, and then it's so. I was telling you, yeah, but how can you do that? Because in a city, you maybe have a small percentage that has access to centralized sewer, and all the rest has no treatment, no sanitation. But it was just, it didn't occur to her that there is something to deal with, because she was working for an organization that dealt with sewer system and centralized treatment. But it's something that you really have to think about. But then it's also a political decision, I think, because, for instance, in India, indeed, you see you have different groups. I mean, you see really organizations like CSD who works very hard on on-site sanitation, treatment, and technologies, and sanitation provision for people who don't have access to sewers. But you also see this ambition of the politician that everything needs to be sewered. But that's, that are major investments, and that might take decades before you're there. And in the meantime, continuously ignoring all the people who don't have this sanitation provision and gets maybe ill, and children are playing in open sewer systems, and that is not what you want. But yeah, I live here in a city. If I would say, okay, I disconnect myself from the sewer system and I go myself, on-site sanitation, I don't know. I don't think that is feasible, and I don't think that will be supported or allowed. I think it's something for, when you develop new cities and new areas, that you have to start thinking, okay, is it, centralized? Is it more decentralized system? Is it on-site? I think at that point you can make that kind of decisions. I mean, in the Netherlands, we did these major investments in sewer systems. And they're far more costly indeed than the treatment plants as such, the whole sewer network that you put there. And I think once you go there, it's very difficult to change that. You really have to think in advance, okay, will I do this? And ideally, you do that indeed with the construction of a city or an urban area. Because if you don't do it, you have to think afterwards. So in many cities where you see this uncontrolled growth, when you've done afterwards have to put a sewer network, it's also very complicated because maybe, the houses are too close to each other. And then, but you can still think about maybe smaller sewer systems, so not as large as we have here. Or you can go indeed for more on-site sewer systems. But I think, I'm now, I was a bit like blaming also the politicians, but maybe it's also not really, well, I don't know. But imagine indeed that you live in an area where you have uncontrolled growth. And when people just come to the city and they just build their houses and the city grows and grows, and there are no facilities, there's no provision. And then you have to come and you have to give people the drinking water. And so that's even not for a humanitarian context. You see this movement to cities everywhere, and countries, they have to deal with that. And here in Europe, we have a very, low population growth, and it's more stable. We have immigration, but, but in some countries, you have an enormous population growth, and all those people, they come to the city. So you have to organize that. And luckily, I'm not a politician. There are major challenges, I think. Yeah.
How do the on-site sanitation systems compare with the more centralized sewage-based systems in terms of the impact that they have on the environment?
A centralized system, the environmental impact depends a lot on how the system works. If it's well designed, and if operation and management is also sufficient, and if there's skilled labor to work on those systems. Because I've seen also many situations where there is a treatment system built, implemented, but there is no maintenance or no follow-up. So then what you do actually is concentrate all your pollution, and it just gets transported through a treatment plant that doesn't work well, and then everything gets discharged on the surface water. And then it's it's only very costly and it's no added value. So you really need also to think in advance about trained personnel, operation and maintenance afterwards. It's not purely the infrastructure itself, it's also the people. And you really have to, think about the best technology for that situation. So maybe indeed it's not a centralized treatment plant. Maybe you have to go to smaller systems, more natural systems, decentralized. So imagine that you just couple a few houses or a block to a decentralized, smaller treatment plant, which is a natural system. And maybe that will not work as perfectly as a centralized system, but because the operation and maintenance is much less, then it still can work better than a large, technically designed, perfect, centralized treatment system. So I think what is it very important if it can be maintained and if people can work with it and operate it. So also an on-site system in your house, when you have a septic tank, and when it gets properly emptied, and when that material gets treated, it is just as good as a sewer system. The only thing is indeed that you need much more, you need to think about how to organize that. Because in many cases you see that the cost for the people are even higher when they have that than when they would be connected to a centralized sewer system, because just of scale effect, and you have to pay yourself to the person who empties the truck, and you have to get it installed, and etc. etc. So it is very difficult to give a general answer to this. When I in my teaching as lecturer, I always try to what I find important is that my students become very critical and independent thinkers and don't accept things being imposed on them or being proposed by consultancy. Always think, okay, is this indeed the best solution? What kind of questions can I ask? How can I evaluate this? And don't, let yourself be overruled by somebody who has a lot of money. Company says, oh, I will take care of it, and just, propose their own technology and their own solution. And in the end, you have no money to run the system, and maintenance is too expensive, and you have no skilled personnel. And yeah.
What can the more permanent communities learn from communities on the move, like those in refugee camps, in terms of sanitation?
Yeah, I think not so much about sanitation, but more in general. I think a lot of people don't realize in what kind of fortunate situation they live in. Also in the Netherlands or, in some other countries. And when people complain about such things that are so irrelevant in the end, when you think about how other people are living and the stress other people have to endure, and I think maybe it would be good, you can't organize that, but that you put them in a camp for 2 days, and show them how life can also be and how different that can be from their life. And that will make their small little concerns and complaints about irrelevant things, that's how I see it. And also with sanitation, I think people don't realize indeed all the implications, what are there because of a centralized sewer system. Yeah, but also realizing how important sanitation is and how important it is for people to have proper sanitation, also to be able to do that and to clean yourself afterwards, and then people take care of your excreta, and that things don't get polluted.
Thanks a lot, Tineke. That's a great message to end with. We should certainly count our blessings, and we are certainly blessed to have the facility to wash ourselves, to keep ourselves clean. And those of us involved in the very important and very noble work of improving the lives of refugees living in camps, we can't thank you enough.